Good afternoon, and thank you, Dean Zhong, for the kind introduction. I'm Mark Feldman, a professor at STL. And as you saw, my remarks today are on STL at 15 years, a milestone, and next steps. And I should say that with my comments today, I will be focused more on the JD side of our program, and Professor Mao Xiaowei will focus more on the JM side of our program. It's terrific to see this turnout today. It's really encouraging. So we will be reaching the 15-year mark this fall. And as STL approaches 15 years is a nice moment to think about looking backward, but at the same time looking forward. And so with my talk today, I do want to spend a fair amount of time looking back to the beginning, but then also thinking about next steps for STL, thinking about the future. In terms of the origins, 2008, so you can see the 15 years is approaching. STL was established, and you can see key goals set out on the slide. I think the core idea of STL when it was established was to found professional graduate level legal education based on an American JD Juris Doctor model that would be located in China, that would be available in China. This was the core idea, and it remains the core idea of STL, to follow an American JD model. But as Professor Mao Xiaowei will discuss in detail, we have added a formidable JM side of the program, which is innovating in its own really interesting ways. So now we do have the dual JD JM. In 2008, we started with a JD. And notice that the name of the school is the School of Transnational Law. Now, in your everyday life, you probably don't hear the word transnational too much, right? You might hear the word international a lot, but transnational is less common. So you might have been wondering why transnational? And certainly one reason why transnational is transnational law as a category is far broader than international law. And importantly, transnational law includes domestic law that has cross-border or international effects. And just to give you a couple of examples, think if you're a lawyer, let's say that you have a Chinese client, and let's say that that Chinese client is thinking about making an investment in the United States, and they're thinking about acquiring a US entity in the United States. If you are a lawyer with a Chinese client that is thinking about, has those plans, it is certainly in your interest to know something about an entity called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which is known as CFIUS, C-F-I-U-S. So if your client is interested in outbound investment, knowing something about CFIUS, knowing about the factors that might drive CFIUS decision-making, that becomes a very important part of the package that you bring as a well-informed lawyer. A second example would be, let's say that one of your Chinese clients is looking to import important inputs for its final product. And what if it is receiving those inputs from a US entity? Again, it is in your interest to know something about an area of law referred to as export controls. These are restrictions, limitations that governments will place on exports, often for national security reasons. So again, if you have a Chinese client that is looking to import inputs into China, but is facing difficulties because of applicable export controls, it is certainly in your interest as a lawyer to have some understanding of the export controls regime in the United States. So these are just two examples of how domestic law has very important cross-border international impact. And that is precisely why at STL we focus on these different legal systems, in particular focusing on the Chinese system, the US system, but certainly also thinking about Europe, also thinking about major jurisdictions. So here we have our dedication ceremony. This was at STL's founding, 2008. And we can begin. Well, first of all, everyone in white, everyone you see there in white, those are the members of the very first STL class. I realize that there are a lot of people in this photo. If you focus front center, you see the person in kind of the light gray suit, right? So that is U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, who attended STL's dedication ceremony in 2008. If you look one row behind Justice Kennedy and one over to the left, there we have Professor Hai Wen, who has served as the chancellor for the Peking University Shenzhen Graduate School, also as vice president of Peking University. STL reflects Professor Hai Wen's vision. And again, the vision was to establish professional graduate level legal education in China based on a US model. If you turn to the front row, 6 seats to the left of Justice Kennedy, there we have the person who implemented Professor Hai Wen's vision, and that is STL founding dean Jeffrey Lehman, who previously had served as dean at the University of Michigan Law School and also had served as president of Cornell University. So this was our dedication ceremony in 2008. We can turn to 2011. 2011 is an important year for me personally. I believe Dean Zhang mentioned this, that I started at STL in 2011. And here we have a group photo. This was a visit by a member of the U.S. Congress, Representative Judy Chu, who represents a California district in the U.S. House of Representatives. And here Representative Chu is joined by members of her delegation. But we also have quite a few STL faculty members in this photo. You see Professor Hai Wen seated next to Representative Chu. If you look 2 seats over from Professor Hai Wen, we have Stephen Yandel, who had served as vice dean and for 1 year as dean of STL in some of STL's earlier years. Dean Yandel spent many years at Yale Law School before joining STL in some of its early years. You can see me there seated next to Dean Yandel. In the back row, here we have mostly our CV Star lecturers, and the CV Star lecturers, these normally will be younger, recent graduates from US law schools who teach small sections focused on research and writing, focus on developing advocacy skills. So most of that back row were members of our CV Star lecturer group in 2011. Now, one thing that is striking about this photo is that so many of the people in the photo are still active with STL 12 years later. So I would begin looking at that back row. 4 over from the right is Professor Doug Levine, who just completed teaching business associations, a course he has taught at STL for many years. Professor Levine had been a law clerk to Chief Justice Warren Burger on the U.S. Supreme Court. 2 over to the right from Professor Levine is Professor Andrew Kerr, who had worked as a CV Star lecturer and has returned to STL, now teaching criminal law at STL. And Professor Kerr holds a JSD from Georgetown Law School and a JD degree from Columbia Law School. In the second row, far left, we have Sang-Yap Kang, who holds a JSD from Columbia Law School, expertise in corporate governance in East Asia. If you turn to the very center, so middle row in the center is Professor Ray Campbell, who coincidentally also clerked for Chief Justice Warren Burger on the U.S. Supreme Court. Professor Campbell focuses on U.S. civil procedure as well as professional responsibility. In that middle row toward the right, second from the right, is Preston Torbert, who has been a visitor at STL for many years, teaching a course that he also teaches at the University of Chicago Law School on drafting bilingual Chinese-English contracts, and this is coming from Professor Torbert's active practice, where he was certainly dealing with cross-border transactions involving U.S.-China. And then on the very right of that second row is Professor Francis Snyder, a leading scholar of international trade and EU law, came to STL following a distinguished career at the London School of Economics, founder of the European Law Journal. Now, I have one more photo from 2011. So this is the 2011 Summer Honors Program. And my understanding is that Dean Zhong will be addressing our so-called SHP program as part of her presentation. So you can see me toward the middle there, seated next to Dean Yandel. Next to Dean Yandel is Martha Ann Yandel, who frequently has accompanied Dean Yandel during his time at STL. And then if you look one over from Martha Ann Yandel, we have Dean Zhang Chung Li, who is joining us today and will be presenting. So there we are together. And actually, I was reminded just a few days ago that the only reason why Dean Zhong Xiaojin is not in the photo is because she was taking the photo. So it's pretty remarkable that here we are looking back summer of 2011, and actually there are 3 of us in the room. I hope I'm not missing anyone, but at least 3 of us in the room who were at that SHP event in 2011 at STL. One final point on this photo, if you look to the front row toward the left, you see those 2 quite young-looking students, yes? Right. So those 2 young-looking students are actually my children. They were not participating in the SHP program. And just to give you a sense of timing, so now I will tell you that my daughter is in college, and my son is going to be starting college this fall. So that just gives you a sense of where we were in 2011. Here we have 2017. You can see that we have steady growth. Certainly the size of our class by 2017 is starting to expand quite rapidly. And from 2017, I would just notice in the center, seated next to Dean Lehman, we have Dean Philip McConaughey, our current dean, who has served as dean since 2013. Dean McConaughey previously served as dean of the Penn State Law School and also as founding dean of Penn State's School of International Affairs. And STL, under Dean McConaughey's leadership, STL has expanded to a remarkable extent. And just to reinforce the steady growth, here are some numbers from our website where you can see very clearly that 2012, our graduating class of 54 students, 2022, we're up to 126. And my understanding is that the upcoming graduation that we're going to have next week, 2023, I believe we're going to be more than 150, if I have that correct. So we see very steady growth overall in terms of the size of the STL class. In terms of learning outcomes, I guess the one point I would really emphasize is the combination of content and method. So in terms of content, of course, we are learning multiple systems at the same time, focused in particular on China and the US, but certainly broader than that. But in addition, we need to keep in mind method, that we are following the American JD Socratic method. I would say that each professor implements the Socratic method in their own particular way, but certainly interactive, very interactive class discussions. And as Professor Mao Xiaowei will address, that also on the JM side, we see, and this is really Professor Mao's initiative, we see far greater levels of interactivity, interaction on our JM side as well. Here we have, we have an annual law fair run by Dean Zhang, which has been very successful in bringing together employers and students for a lot of opportunities for interaction right on the STL campus. And we just had our most recent law fair in the past several weeks. So this has been a very successful event at STL. In terms of STL's model of expertise from different systems, the need for expertise in different systems, we see that model being reinforced in the marketplace. And it's being reinforced through what we see is a string of mergers between large Chinese firms and large foreign firms. And so we see that the marketplace is confirming our model, right? That the marketplace is confirming the need to have expertise both in China and in jurisdictions outside of China. And so here we just have several examples of such mergers. Here we see a number of different activities that STL students engage in, different kinds of outings, trips to the beach, dinners, graduation ceremonies, social time. I would add, I don't have photos, but the activities on campus that are very popular would include soccer, badminton, basketball, and it's very important to have this kind of balance, and certainly for our students, they do engage in a lot of these outdoor activities, social time, which is very important to balance certainly the day-to-day work of the law school. So we can turn to some of our distinguished alumni, and this group is really something. And I think one point I would really highlight with our alumni is that in the very early days of STL, I think the basic idea was that STL graduates, the goal was that STL graduates would go on to practice at large firms, and most likely at large international firms. I think that was the early idea. And what has happened over time is that STL graduates have really reimagined the possibilities that an STL education can create. I mean, this has come from the students. It is from their reimagination. And so we certainly see many of our graduates who are distinguished lawyers at large international law firms. I mean, you see a set of lawyers who have been included in the China Elite Lawyer 30 under 30. We have Zhao Feng, Liu Di, Tsai Jin-lan, all included in that 30 under 30. But then we can turn to leadership in government, and leadership in government including party leadership, also including leadership in the Supreme People's Court. So there we see Liao Xiaoqing, Chen Zhi, Wang Ru, so all showing leadership in government positions. And then we also have leadership in international organizations, and international organizations ranging from arbitration to human rights to economic development. You see Jiang Cunyan working on arbitration, Zhou Yu, human rights, Liu Xing'er working on economic development. And then I would mention that we also have had a few exceptionally successful founders of new ventures. And I think that this really reinforces that part of the education, and a key part of the education at STL, is about creativity and innovation, right? We attract people who want to innovate, who want to think creatively, and for people like Dong Xiaoling and people like Song Chao have actually gone on to found their own successful ventures. So again, you see our own graduates reimagining the kinds of opportunities that an STL education can create. In terms of faculty, I'll certainly be saying more about a number of our faculty members. For now, I would just highlight Professor Sang-Yap Kang, who received an incredible honor of being included in the prestigious Academic Society of the European Corporate Governance Institute. Professor Francis Snyder, who I had mentioned, received China's Friendship Award, which is China's highest honor for foreign experts who have made outstanding contributions to the country's economic and social progress. And I would mention here founding Dean Jeffrey Lehman named one of China's 40 most influential foreign experts in 40 years since reform and opening up. So just three extraordinary honors that I would highlight. In terms of major conferences at STL, we do have major conferences throughout the year. This is one example where STL and the University of California, Berkeley Law School co-hosted a forum on legal issues confronting startup companies, and as you can see, that conference was very well attended. In terms of exchange programs, we do have a global network of exchange programs, including top institutions in Europe, the United States, South America, and Australia. In terms of moot competitions, we have many different moot competitions available, and these span a wide range of subject areas, including public international law, commercial arbitration, investment arbitration, international trade law, international humanitarian law. So for those of you who might be interested in moot competitions, there are many, many opportunities to consider. And here we have some more examples of those moot competitions. Now, that is taking us up to the present. So now we can think a little bit about next steps. We can think a bit about the future. And I think one way we could think about the future is through what I call here 5 lenses, right? So we can think in terms of 5 different regions. We can start global and then move to the narrower Asia-Pacific region, and then move to China, then move to the Greater Bay Area, which I realize that we're in the north, so you probably do not hear as much about the Greater Bay Area as we do in the south. But the Greater Bay Area being a set of major cities in Guangdong province, and also Hong Kong and Macau. So I'll just say a bit about the Greater Bay Area initiative. And then finally, Shenzhen. So global, we certainly will be looking to, as ever, to expand our relationships with leading universities, international organizations, corporations, law firms. Our global recruitment of faculty obviously is ongoing. We also have a master's program, an LLM program, featuring international students. So our global recruitment for our LLM program, we certainly will be looking to further expand that. And then in terms of global, I've just highlighted a few policy areas where there's clearly a lot of work being done on a global basis. Climate policy, I would mention our colleague, Professor Stephen Minos, who holds a PhD from King's College London. Professor Minos has been active in UN climate negotiations, the Paris Agreement negotiations, currently serving as vice chair of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Technology Executive Committee, which serves the UN Climate Convention and the Paris Agreement. On trade policy, I'd mentioned our colleague, Professor Francis Snyder, who, again, spent much of his career at the London School of Economics. We also have another leading trade law scholar, Professor Asif Qureshi, who holds a PhD from the London School of Economics. On corporate governance, I had mentioned Professor Sanyap Khan, who focuses on corporate governance in Asia. In terms of a comparative perspective, Professor Nitzan Shalon, who holds a JSD from Harvard Law School, focuses on corporate governance in the United States. International investment arbitration, that's an area that I work on. I serve on the academic forum on ISDS. ISDS stands for Investor State Dispute Settlement. And that forum is aimed at supporting ongoing multilateral negotiations on investment arbitration reform that are currently occurring in the context of Working Group 3 of UNCITRAL, which is the UN Commission on International Trade Law. So these are just a few thoughts in terms of the global lens. If we now turn to an Asia-Pacific lens, first I would highlight that in terms of international arbitration and mediation, there has been rapid progress throughout the Asia-Pacific, and I think for our students, we should be thinking beyond just Hong Kong, Singapore, that we have a lot of opportunities in Seoul, opportunities in Kuala Lumpur, Tokyo. So for those who are interested in international arbitration, it's certainly it's a good idea to be keeping these different opportunities in mind. In terms of close collaboration with leading universities in the Asia-Pacific, I would just note one example, which is we tend to have a very good relationship with the National University of Singapore. Our colleague, Professor Norman Ho, who specializes in pre-modern Chinese legal history and legal theory. Professor Ho has taught at NUS several times, and I have visited NUS and spent time at NUS many times as part of the annual Singapore International Arbitration Academy, which I have participated in for many years. And that academy is organized by the Center for International Law that is based at NUS. And you see that I also have on the slide the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. I think this is a very important organization to keep an eye on. They're doing a lot of important rulemaking in the Asia Pacific, showing a lot of leadership in the Asia Pacific. And I would also just mention that there is a new so-called mega regional free trade agreement called the RCEP agreement. That's the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. ASEAN is going to be establishing a secretariat in Singapore to support that RCEP agreement, and I think that's a kind of opportunity that we should certainly keep an eye on in the Asia Pacific. Turning to China, certainly the tech sector is an area to focus on. In the context of technology, I would mention two of our intellectual property focused scholars. Joy Xiang, Professor Xiang, has patent expertise and also a lot of practice experience, spent many years at Microsoft. Professor Danny Friedman holds a PhD from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and his research, much of his research focuses on the interrelationship between technology and intellectual property law. On algorithms, I would note that Professor Gilad Abiri, our colleague Professor Abiri, who holds an SJD degree from Yale Law School, and Professor Zheng Ge, who's based at Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Really just a month or so ago, they hosted a major workshop on algorithmic recommendation and law. This was a groundbreaking workshop on the regulation of algorithms, which certainly is going to be a very important issue in the approaching years. And I would just notice again with China, I mentioned Professor Mao's leadership with the JM program, and I think that when you start thinking about different JM programs within China, STLs in so many different ways really does stand out, and I think in the future will be standing out even more. So on a China level, I think the work that Professor Mao is doing on the JM side really deserves to be highlighted as something very significant that is happening at STL. Greater Bay Area, I had mentioned, this is a regional initiative focused in Guangdong. A few key themes of innovation, key themes of internationalization, and obviously these themes of innovation and internationalization, and I would add rule harmonization as well. All of these fit very nicely with STL, and so I think for STL we certainly need to be keeping a close eye on developments with the Greater Bay Area program. And then finally, Shenzhen. Certainly with Shenzhen, we're focused on tech, focused on intellectual property. I think it's worth highlighting that the city, with respect to artificial intelligence, the city recently announced an initiative, a regulation aimed at boosting the development of AI within Shenzhen. Obviously, AI is going to affect legal practice in so many ways. I mean, the pace of change, really the pace of change just in the last few months has been extraordinary, right? And so I think we're all just trying to brace for the future. But at the same time, while we brace for the future, we also need to embrace AI as simply a part of our future reality. And so given our location in Shenzhen, certainly a focus on AI. So with that, I thank you again for your time, and now we will turn to Professor Mao Xiaowei, who will be discussing, again, the JM side of our program. Thank you again.